Welcome guys, this is Ola from Stop Me O channel. This is the video that I have announced already. It took me a while to finally record it, sorry about that. Christmas time is a bit busy, but also I really wanted to take my time and analyze everything that I actually think about Life is Strange 2, all the thoughts that I have, all the criticism, all the things that I liked. And now I'm about to share all of that with you. This is the ultimate review of Life is Strange 2. First thing that I want to say, I absolutely admire Dontnod for wanting to create a new story and new characters. I respect the game as their creation because I know what it takes to create something. I understand that they took their time and their hearts and their spirits and they put them in that game and it's their baby. So for that reason it's hard to criticize it because when you know that someone took their time and made a lot of effort, you want to appreciate that, and I do. I really appreciate their efforts and the time they took to create this game, but I'm not going to shy away from criticism in that review. I'm going to discuss both my likes and my dislikes. At the same time, obviously when you create something and you're putting it out there, you're vulnerable to criticism, so you have to expect both the good and the bad in terms of reviews, in terms of people's opinions on Steam, on PS4 stores. You're open to that, so there also must be ready for whatever may come review-wise. Because this is the ultimate review, I pretty much want to discuss everything. So let's start from the beginning. Dontnod created one of the best games that ever existed, which is Life is Strange, the original game. Max and Chloe, characters that we grew fond of, characters that we adored, most of us at least. It was a game that included both a great story, a beautiful relationship, amazing music, and so many feelings and emotions. So at some point they needed to ask themselves, where do we go from here? And the answer that they found was somewhere else. They wanted to move on from Max and Chloe, at the time at least. They wanted to create a new story. They wanted to create a whole franchise with Life is Strange games that focus on people most of all, choices that they make, and I guess as a side plot, powers. They came up with Sean and Daniel soon after the first game. That's what they told us at least. So they've been working on Life is Strange 2 ever since Life is Strange 1 was released. They surely took their time with it. For some reason, when the game was out, we still had to wait months and months for every single episode, but I'll discuss that later on. Finally, a year ago in September, Life is Strange 2 was released. Life is Strange 2 focuses on two brothers, Sean and Daniel Diaz. Obviously this is a spoiler review, so if you haven't played the game or at all, you might want to skip that review and come back later. Story focuses on Sean and Daniel Diaz, two boys of Mexican origins on their father's side, both born and raised in America. We see them on the regular day. Sean's talking about a party, Daniel's running around, playing I suppose. And then a tragedy happens. A policeman that misunderstood the situation shot their father, Esteban, which led to Sean and Daniel making a weird decision of running away to Mexico to claim their father's land. Yes, that happened. I'll go back to that later on because logic is questionable at least. For now, let's just focus on the plot. So this is what's happening. This is where we start off in the first episode called Rules. Later on, we follow their steps as they're struggling to survive, as they're meeting new people, as they're changing locations, as they're traveling, as they're struggling money-wise. And the big question is, are they going to get caught? Are they going to actually reach Puerto Lobos, so their father's hometown? Because that game is actually based on travel, we had to change the locations every single episode. This is something that I didn't like at all actually when it comes to Life is Strange 2. I much prefer being in the same place, getting to know the same place like we did in the first game. We were walking around Arcadia Bay, we kept seeing same people in every single episode. At least for me it felt comfortable, it felt safe, and I enjoyed that. I like a small city vibe that the first game presented. In that second game we kept changing locations. I believe because of that, we had to wait longer for every single new episode. It took some time for them to develop new places that they were visiting. That's why I think overall it was a mistake. As much as I like road trip stories, I don't think it worked in Life is Strange 2. It would be better to stick around the same place. Obviously, then the story would have to change. But for example, to me, I personally enjoyed episode 2 because we were sticking around Beaver's Creek and it felt wholesome, it felt nostalgic. It really felt like I could stick around that place and like develop my relationships with people. Because of the fact that they were running away, we also kept meeting new people in each episode. Personally, I never really grew fond of anyone that much. We only spent brief moments with the characters that we got to meet in every single episode, and I didn't really get accustomed to any of them. It would be awesome to have Finn or like Cassidy or anyone really around for longer than one episode. I think the only person that stuck around for more than one episode was, well, Karen, because she was in both episodes 4 and 5, and Chris because he was part of the spin-off and part of the episode 2. Ironically speaking, these were my two favorite side characters, so well, there you go. For example, when you met that gay couple in episode 5, we spoke to them for like 2 whole minutes and then we had to say goodbye to them. I didn't care at all. Like, I spent 2 minutes with them. I didn't care that I'm saying goodbye to them. It didn't move me at all, so, you know, they might as well not be there. I've been saying this in every single episode review. I just didn't like the fact that we kept moving around. I'd much prefer to have like a stationary location, and obviously some people enjoyed that. Like, what I want to say is there's plenty of huge Life is Strange 2 fans, and I mean, that's great for you. If you enjoyed that game as much, that's fantastic. But I've also noticed there are people hating each other in the fandom. Like, Life is Strange 2 fans hate Life is Strange fans as if it was some sort of a competition. That's a bit childish. Like, let people enjoy whatever they enjoy. I'm trying to be as rational as possible with my criticism. I want to discuss both the good and the bad sides of this game, so that at the end of the day you can agree with me or we can agree to disagree and still like be cool with one another. Also, because this is a sequel, I think it's hard not to compare both these games. In my review, Life is Strange will come up from time to time. Protagonists. Now that's a very important issue. Sean Diaz, I actually liked him so much. He was a very likable protagonist, he was easy to relate to, and I really wanted the best for him. I suppose he had a nice dynamic with Daniel, but like, I'm sorry, I never really liked Daniel. He was so annoying. Obviously he was more annoying if you didn't raise him well. I think I raised my Daniel well, end of the game, but he kept whining, he kept screaming, he was really childish even for a child. I much preferred Chris. Chris was such a sweetheart. Yeah, that game really made me question, do I maybe dislike kids in general? Like, I don't have younger siblings, I don't really enjoy spending time with children because we cannot really discuss anything. Then again, I found my answer, no, I don't dislike kids. I liked Chris a lot. I would swap him. I finally grew fond of Daniel, but that was when he grew up. Yeah, he grew up well. Adult Daniel, this is the Daniel that I can be on board with. Child Daniel, I wanted to kill him more often than not. Like, I didn't really like him, so that's not good if you dislike 50% of your protagonists. I think if you want to have a game that includes a child, you don't want the type of a child that would cry on an airplane, you know what I mean. You'd prefer the child that's sort of polite and quiet. I think that's the dynamic that we had here. Daniel was okay from time to time, but when he was screaming, I really wanted to like stop playing the game, and that's not, I feel like that's a bit too far. Now, having said that, as he grew up, he became likable. Powers. As we know, Max's superpower was being able to travel back in time through her photos that she took and change the events. Now, that was something that you were able to do, being the protagonist, being the player. As much as telekinesis was a badass power, it wasn't really as cool to watch others perform it. We weren't able to move the objects around. It was always Daniel. We were only able to train him, Yoda style, but we weren't able to do anything, and more often than not, events got triggered because Daniel did something that we couldn't really influence. So him losing control over his powers. I wish we were able to perform the powers. I think it would be nicer to be able to do it yourself. I think this is a crucial part of the franchise, the protagonist that has superpowers, not the protagonist that's brother to someone who has superpowers. So yeah, as much as it was really cool to watch Daniel do some of the stuff, I just wish it was Sean who were actually able to do it. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. That's the portrayal of racism in the game and logic behind the plot. I recorded a video once called "Are politics really necessary in games?" and I said that they're not. I changed my opinion from then because I realized that this is not necessarily what I was thinking. I'm okay with having politics in the game. Politics are important, and politics is not something that we can shy away from. It's not something that we can say that we can ignore because it concerns all of our lives, especially if you're part of minority and you don't have the privilege to ignore it. Having said that, the way it was portrayed in the game, the whole racism problem, I didn't feel like it was subtle. I didn't feel like it was well presented. In my opinion, it was one-sided, and it just felt like every single person that they met was really racist in an oversimplified way. Do racist people exist? Yes, of course. Do situations like that happen? Yes, they do, but they don't happen daily. They don't happen to you every single day when you're living in the US or in Europe for that matter. Definitely not in Europe. I've had many people claim in the comments that racist things happen to them, and I'm very sorry to hear that. I can easily imagine that. I know that racism exists, but I think it's a mistake to portray it in such a black and white manner, not a pun intended. I'm sure that there's many people of colors living in the US that encounter racism. Maybe they live in smaller villages, maybe they live closer to the central states, but I'm also certain that there's plenty of people of color who are actually okay and fine, and they don't encounter racism every single day. End of the day, as much as I appreciate them trying to portray it and discuss that problem, because this is an important problem, I think the way they presented it was oversimplified. I don't think it was spot on. I wish they were more complex about it. I wish it would be more complicated. Now, depending on your own experience, you might agree or disagree with me. Don't think that just because I'm white, I don't understand being part of a minority, because I do, but it just didn't feel right, the way they presented racism. I know that this will blow up in the comments anytime I mention the word racist. There's plenty of people in the comments claiming that I'm wrong or that I'm right, but this is my opinion. I don't feel like the racism portrayal was spot on. It felt even cringy at times. Honestly, it felt like a parody of racism. Let's move on to logic, and then we'll be done with criticism. Logic in the game, or lack of it, I should probably say. Due to an incident, Daniel murders a cop. The cop is dead. Daniel didn't really influence that. Like, it wasn't his own decision, he just didn't control his power at the time. What do Sean and Daniel do? They run off to Mexico. More than that, every single adult that we meet along the way, our grandparents, or like Brody, even Karen, they're on board with the Mexico plan. We're talking about adults, reasonable people. I mean, if your life is strange fun and you're 13 or something, and you think that you can just head off to Mexico with $13 in your pocket and that you will make it, you won't, and they wouldn't. I really had to turn a blind eye on that problem. Logic among the adults, the fact that they even want to go to Mexico, Sean and Daniel, like, why I understand that they panicked. It was a terrible plan. Another issue that I had was treating Sean and Daniel as suspects. I think law-wise I could record a whole separate video, so I'm not going to discuss that right here, right now, but they would never be treated as suspects. Imagine police coming to their house. What they find is Esteban shot dead, a policeman that's dead, a car that's flipped over, and 2 young boys missing. They're only like 15 and however old Daniel is, I don't remember. They're missing. Do you really assume that they were guilty of that? Do you really assume that they did that? And if you are assuming that, how can you explain that and remain reasonable? We're talking about the power, a superpower. They have no idea that Daniel has these powers. How do you explain that? You can't. Yet the police somehow assumed that it was Sean and Daniel's fault, and they were treated as suspects. That's not something I am ever willing to believe. That wouldn't happen. In fact, I've heard about so many cases in real life when parents are found dead and children are missing, you sort of assume that there was a third party involved. You sort of assume that the third party kidnapped Sean and Daniel, for example. This is what you're thinking. This is what you're assuming. You're assuming that Sean and Daniel are victims and you're looking for them to help them, not to arrest them. Yeah, I suppose I had a big problem with that. I'm surprised that adults would sort of invent that type of a plot. Now let's move on to things that I actually enjoyed when it comes to that game. I think it was beautiful visually. I think that they really moved on from failed lip sync in Life is Strange to having some actual facial movements, proper ones in that game. The game mechanics were much nicer. It was really cool to walk around and like have all these new locations, not plot wise but like visually wise. It was much nicer. Music was amazing, like it always was. My only complaint is there wasn't enough of it. In fact, it was less and less with every single episode, and in the final episode there wasn't a single licensed song. That's weird, because I believe Life is Strange is a franchise strongly oriented around music, so it felt weird to not have it around. Luckily, we had an amazing soundtrack by Jonathan Morali that worked really well, that made me cry in one of the final endings. So I suppose it wasn't as big of an issue not having that music in that final episode. Then again, it would be nice to actually have some songs around. Now on to what I most like about Life is Strange 2. It was actually the endings. There were 4 main endings and they depended on your morality level, on how you raised Daniel. It was actually fantastic how they implemented the choices. So many choices led to that final outcome. I believe it was more than 50 different choices to lead you to whatever your ending was, and I'm sure it must have been time consuming to figure it out properly. That's something really cool, something that I appreciate a lot. Now, while playing Life is Strange 2, I kept saying that I really don't know what my opinion is and that it all will depend on the ending. Now, the endings really saved the game for me. Sort of. They were complex and they weren't as obvious. They weren't black and white. They were more of grayish. They weren't really happy nor sad, apart from that one ending when Sean dies and Daniel is left alone in Puerto Lobos. That one really made me cry, and so I must have really cared about Sean. It tells you that this game really did get to you. No matter which ending you got, you always lose something, whether it's your relationships in the US, your relationship with your mother, your relationship with your grandparents or with Lila, or it's being around each other. In that these 2 endings, Sean and Daniel are separated. It's never a win-win situation, and I think that really made the game special in a way. End of the day, that final episode was great. Like I mentioned before, my favorite episode was episode 2 because of the Christmas, wholesome family, Christmas markets, being around the same location, and the final episode when they finally presented some poetic scenes like the Firefly scenes, which was one of the best scenes in this entire franchise, not just Life is Strange 2. To sum it up, I think I'd rate this game 7 out of 10. I don't think I will be replaying it. If you preferred Life is Strange 2 over the first game, then I'm happy for you. This is great for you. Believe me, I wish I would be able to enjoy it as much. I liked the game, but waiting periods between the episodes, the logic behind some of the moments and some of the decisions, the way they portrayed racism, it sort of ruined it for me from time to time. Like, I had to really ignore it and turn a blind eye on it so that I would be able to enjoy the rest of it. I enjoyed many things about that game. Most of all, Sean was a great character to play with. Like I mentioned before, while I don't think plot-wise it was wise to change locations, it was also intriguing to see new places in the States. It was exciting. Endings were awesome. I'm somewhat in the middle. Perhaps 7 is too low, like 7.5. But the first game for me was a strong 9 out of 10 rating. Is there a future ahead for the franchise? I'm fairly certain there is. I know some things. I might record a video about that. I'm still wondering if I should. So stick around. If there's any news about Life is Strange, believe me, this is the channel that you want to be subscribed to, because here you will find out about that first. I guess this is what I wanted to say. I hope you can understand that we don't all have to like the same things. Like, I preferred the first game, many people did, but I also like the second one, and it's like, it's totally okay. You can prefer the first one, you can prefer the second one, just don't act all aggressive about it because it's really childish. And this is what I noticed around the fandom. That's not really great, because this is not what Life is Strange fandom was about in the first place. Anyway, whether you agree or disagree with me, please drop a like, it helps a lot, and consider becoming a Patreon, it also helps a lot. Yes, I'll see you around, guys. Thank you so much for watching that video. Stay safe. This was Ola from Stop Me O channel. Bye.